You will probably have seen these by now, but if you haven't, I recommend that you go and watch the 4 released short films by OTOY and the Roddenberry Archive. Now, we've spoken about these on the channel before, so as I say, odds are you've probably seen what we're here to talk about. The big one that happened at the end of 2024 was the Unification short film that brought back William Shatner via some digital prosthetics, which I will get into. I will explain all of that, and the actor Sam Witwer. So effectively, Captain Kirk was back. The company have released 3 films prior to this. We had the short film 765874, then there was Memory Wall, and then there was Regeneration. Each of these short movies have been, when I say short, by the way, one of them's 30 seconds long. I mean short, but they have been crafted with ultra levels of detail and care. The Roddenberry Archive is an incredible project that has been put together by such people as Denise and Michael Okuda, production designer Dave Blass, who of course we all know from Star Trek Picard's 2nd and 3rd season, but of course Jules Urbach, who is the CEO of OTOY, which is the company that created the technology that's allowed a lot of this to happen, has been deeply involved for the longest time as well. I'm going to go through the released short films in order. So we're going to start, as I say, with 765874, and I'm going to explain where that number comes from, moving on to Memory Wall, then Regeneration, and then Unification. Along the way, we'll be doing call-outs, references, and Easter eggs. So that's the other thing. This ups and downs is going to be, from the jump, it's going to be temporal observations. So, let's go. Starting with the first short film, aptly titled 765874. Now, what is that? Yeoman Colt, who appeared in the original pilot for Star Trek, The Cage. She was, of course, the captain's yeoman, who was replacing another yeoman who had been killed on a mission immediately prior to the events of The Cage. Well, her serial number is, you guessed it, 765874. That actually comes from the expanded universe, from the comics, from such comics as Star Trek Early Voyages, from which a lot of what we see draws inspiration. Colt is a largely unknown character in Star Trek because, of course, she never returned after The Cage. She wasn't in Where No Man Has Gone Before. She has yet to appear in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, if in fact she will appear in Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and she didn't then make the change hadn't made the change, I should say, to the motion picture and the series of films, or the Kelvin universe either. Laurel Goodwin, who portrayed the character back in The Cage, only appeared in that one episode. Well, I suppose 3 if you count the Menagerie parts 1 and 2. Here, the role is portrayed by Mahetaisa, and the likeness is uncanny. A lot of the discussion around OTOY's projects is the use of the digital prosthetics, which certainly come into play earlier on when things like Memory Wall and Regeneration, but of course they play the biggest role in Unification. Mahetaisa is not using digital prosthetics in this short film, so you might be forgiven if this is your first time watching them for going, what the heck is Sean on about? Well, I'll get to that. But first of all, up for her performance as Colt. So much of these are wordless. So much has to be done with facial expressions and styling and costume, but I believe it is uncanny how they nailed Laurel Goodwin's performance as Colt in this wordless performance by Mahetaisa. So my first up is absolutely for how they captured the character. The second up is for just how good everything looks. A lot of this was designed to be seen on VR headsets, Apple Vision Pro being the main one, but that is expanding now onto other VR platforms as well. And you can see in how immersive it is. This is the Roddenberry Archive in expansion as well. You know, you can walk around the Enterprise, you can walk around the bridge of every Enterprise and various ships, Deep Space Nine as well. It's a little bit uncanny, if I'm honest with you, but then again, I'm an old-fashioned sort. You hear a lot of talk about things like, you know, the VR wall that was used extensively on Star Trek Discovery, among other projects. And sometimes there can be a sort of a cold feeling, but I think largely the technology has come on so much that it can immerse the actor in the scene. And you certainly get that impression in a lot of the 765-874 series. Now, a lot of it, of course, is digital environments as well. For example, I don't believe that they actually did crash the Enterprise D saucer on Veridian 3 again. Oops, spoiler. Nor do I believe that they rebuilt from scratch Starfleet headquarters in San Francisco. But by goodness, it's an up from me, because how good does that look? This, of course, is inspired heavily by Star Trek the Motion Picture. And seeing, for example, those air trams that were introduced in the motion picture flying again, absolutely beautiful. Plus, I'm a sucker for the Golden Gate Bridge. I like how they make San Francisco feel like a very lived-in city. You have those hover cars or are they hover cars? Maybe that's not the right description. Those cars, anyway, driving around, makes it feel like quite a functional city. But for me, what was just beautiful and take an up was seeing the Space Shuttle Enterprise parked beside the Enterprise 1701 as it appeared in the cage. So there are subtle differences. For example, the deflector dish is slightly larger, and you have those, for want of a better word, spikes coming out of the Bussard collectors as well. This is a version of history that saw this Enterprise become a museum parked at San Francisco. Now again, that comes from the comic Star Trek Early Voyages. You had the issues Futures and Future Tense that sees Yeoman Colt go traveling through time. As I said, a lot of it draws inspiration from that. All of this happening within 30 seconds, by the way, and setting up such a rich tapestry of a story to tell. But again, I just want to gush over how gorgeous the Enterprise looks set up as a museum. Of course, this idea of a ship parked on the grounds in San Francisco as a museum would come up years later for Voyager being another example, which we see in Lower Decks before, of course, it's eventually moved to the Fleet Museum at 8th and Prime. This short film finishes with Yeoman Colt in silhouette, and then that's it. We're moving on to the next one. 765-874 becomes the through line. It is the through title, if you like, of each of the 4 projects. The next one being called 765-874 Memory Wall. Now, if you know me at all, you know what the next up is going to be. Take an up to the redesigned USS Enterprise first seen in Star Trek the Motion Picture. And of course, you've got that beautiful ventral aft view of the ship as well. This, in a way, feels like OTOY's going, look what we can do. And you know what? I'll give you that one. It looks good. What we get here as well is the introduction of Spock, as played by Lawrence Selleck, as he would have appeared in Star Trek the Motion Picture. Spock, I mean, maybe Lawrence Selleck looked like that during the motion picture. Yeah, he didn't. It is also the introduction of these digital prosthetics that I was speaking about. Let's address the deepfakes in the room. I totally understand the fear and the discomfort around deepfake technology, particularly when it comes to actors' livelihoods. And to address this point, I sort of need to jump forward a little bit. We had the chance to interview Sam Witwer, who is the actor who plays William Shatner's Kirk in Unification. Now, Sam Witwer is, if I just check my notes, in everything. I'm not exaggerating. That man's IMDb is frightening. But in terms of sci-fi, he really is in everything. He was very, very kind. He took the time to speak to me and to address dead on the concerns around technology like this. Because the big question being, if you can mask another actor's face onto a new actor, is everyone going to start losing work going forward? And the answer is there is a chance of that. I would be lying to you if I said that that wasn't a possibility. This is the world that we live in. The reason why I can sit here right now and talk to you and say I'm comfortable with OTOY's use of it is because of the ethical approach that they have to it. For example, speaking to Sam, who I'm to full disclosure, is a producer as well on Unification. It's about actors being able to take ownership over their own image, even if that image changes. Sam puts it better than I do, but in theory, Sam goes in today, gets mapped and scanned, and that's his image done, and that's what he looks like today. He goes off again. Something happens, has a terrible accident, scar on his face. He can use the mapping that he did to still appear, if you like, as he did then. My point is that you are not locked into how you look on a certain time. So, and if you want the following year, you go in, you do the same mapping again. Now you have two versions of yourself, and so on and so on. But it also means then that 20 years down the line, and you want to play a role you played 20 years ago, you have that mask to slip over your own face. William Shatner was mapped, recorded, and his image was absorbed into this technology so that Sam could play him on screen in real time. That's the other big thing about this technology, is that in real time, so as the director, Carlos Baena, by the way, who is just lovely, as he's directing Sam on set and he's looking through the monitors, the technology has got to a point where they can map William Shatner's face over Sam in real time and he can direct him as it goes. It's about how it's used. In the ethics of it all, I think this is exciting. And I think this is really interesting. And this is what they did with Lawrence Selleck and Spock, because prosthetics is the accurate word here. So you have an actor comes in, say existing films at the moment, they come in and they put on prosthetics and they put on, latex or whatever to appear as something else. They wear a mask. Okay. This is that, but digitally. But again, I don't want to sound naive and I don't want to say this has the potential to be abused. And in the current uncertain climate where actors are going on strike to protect their livelihoods, it's an important conversation to be clear about. Which is why, bringing it full circle, I want to make it very clear that I am comfortable with OTOY's use of this technology, understanding and believing that they are coming at it from an ethical place. I'm going to pause that there, and we're going to come back to that when we're discussing Unification, because again, this is one thing that kind of looms large over this entire project. But I must say, up for how they bring Leonard Nimoy back to life again via Lawrence Selleck here. It looks, it's uncanny because sadly, I know Leonard Nimoy passed away in 2015, and yet this is incredible. Also, again, I must say this, all of this done with the permission and encouragement of Susan Bay Nimoy, Leonard Nimoy's widow, with the permission of the estate as well. This short film, do you remember, Sean, you were talking about a short film? I do. So 76587 memory wall. This sees Yeoman Cult arrive on the aforementioned memory wall. This being based on a sequence that was cut from Star Trek the Motion Picture. In fact, you can see that lake that is shaped a bit like the CBS logo really, but like the mouth of V'ger, or the V'ger that we see inside the superstructure in the motion picture, is sort of a teardrop, sort of not, that Cult is walking toward, is an awe-inspiring sight. And again, a lot of this obviously done digitally, but it looks fantastic. We get as well a quick shot of Cult obviously undergoing a mind meld. We can infer, of course, that this is Spock passing on to her the knowledge of, well, everything Spock knows. It's rather a lot, really. The only thing, and maybe this is me just being thick, but I do have a down. Who are the other four people standing on top of that? It's never addressed. In all four of the films, you never get an answer as to who the other four people standing on the top of this are. Maybe that's nitpicking. Maybe I just like me some answers. I'm a simple man. So I will say that if you show me the ring ship Enterprise XCV-330, if you show it up, down, side to side, or lying in a frozen wasteland, you're getting an up from me. Not that it's lying in a frozen wasteland, by the way. I'm not saying I want it destroyed. I'm saying gorgeous. Because the ring ship Enterprise, again, it's a much older design by Matt Jeffries, and it was only really seen on screen initially in Star Trek The Motion Picture. It's one of the drawings that's in the rec deck. Have to say, much as I do really enjoy Star Trek Enterprise, I like that they didn't retroactively add the NX-01 to that wall. There was talk about it when the director's edition was being done back in the early 2000s, actually 2001 I believe it was. There was talk of adding the NX-01 to that wall. I get why they would do that, and I'm glad they didn't. In the theme of the motion picture, when we next see Colt in silhouette, she is wearing the away team jacket that Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Decker wore in the motion picture toward the end when they go to meet with what is revealed to be the Voyager 6 probe. I guess, by the way, spoilers for Star Trek The Motion Picture? Impressive. If you haven't seen it at this point, I really recommend it. In the motion picture, Spock mind melds with V'ger, and he is overwhelmed with flashes of images of V'ger's journey. We get something a little bit similar here. You see Colt reaching out and effectively touching the stars. Now what this looks like to you and I, she's poking the screen, so you know, might be poking me in the eye. But in touching the stars, she's obviously connected to something else, because as part of, I presume, the mind meld with Spock, you get this rapid progression of images. You get Colt watching the sunset. You then get the burning, rushing toward the ground Enterprise 1701 from the search for Spock up. But at what cost? You get more shots of the mind meld, you get a shot of a planet, a shot of Jupiter. You then get your first clear shot of the plaque on the Voyager 6 probe sent by NASA. So if there had been any uncertainty that this was the motion picture or a tie-in, that's done away with. We then get a scene of what looks like Colt's hand reaching out in a tableau that seems directly inspired by the creation of man, but it is a robot hand that she's reaching toward. This, to me at least, seems to be suggesting the union of humanity and technology, which, in the grand scheme of things, is what this series is about. This then set of reveals continues, including a quick shot of poor old Captain Pike, obviously after the incident with the Delta radiation. Once again, we get Colt looking at a sunset, a shot of Spock in the EVA helmet from the motion picture, which also featured in The Wrath of Khan, and remember, which was of course what he said when mind melding with McCoy at the end of The Wrath of Khan to save his Katra. And then we get, in full reveal, Lawrence Selleck as Spock, as he appeared in Star Trek The Motion Picture, which is absolutely an up from me. Now, our next film is 765874 Regeneration. And for fans of Star Trek Generations out there, this one was a treat. It opens on a woodland setting, and we sort of follow a view across a creek turning into a small river. And then suddenly, why is there an executive shuttle from Star Trek movies flying past there? One that would eventually become the USS Jenolan. I love knowing these little things. It's a bit random, but I like it. We get the reveal then of the edge of a somewhat familiar saucer section. Are we on? We're never on. Are we on Veridian 3? I'll tell you what, we are. And it seems to be the Veridian 3 that comes from William Shatner's novel, The Return. Take it up. By the way, read that book, it's quite good. As early as the mid-90s, the idea that the saucer section of the Enterprise D not being left on the surface of Veridian 3 so as not to break the Prime Directive was introduced back then. And what we're seeing here is a visual representation of that. You have got full salvage teams, you've got walkways, you've got what appear to be tugs getting ready to lift the saucer section off the surface. What you also have is a couple of nice cameos. You have the Galileo type shuttle that was introduced and only seen in Star Trek Generations. It's effectively a reuse of the model that we saw in Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, but with added side windows. So that version only appeared in Generations. And also the Type 7 shuttlecraft, which was familiar from the Next Generation, which is also seen in this scene here. Of course, this is mirroring the ending of Star Trek Generations, where the crews of that Miranda class, that Oberth class, and the USS Farragut, the Nebula class, start salvaging, if you like, the saving the crew of the Enterprise. That big pan out and reveal though, seeing the saucer section there with, obviously there's this swath of destruction behind it, isn't there? But it's so filled in with mist. It's such a beautiful image. It's an up from me. It is, however, not the only thing going on, because elsewhere on Viridian 3, a robed figure is climbing up a rocky hill face beside some creaky metal structures and bridges to find an old stone cairn. This is an up from me straight. I mean, if they did nothing else with this scene, this would be an up from me. The attention to detail in this scene is incredible. Now, it's based, of course, on Star Trek Generations, of course, and as I said, you had the aforementioned William Shatner's The Return, but also, almost panel for panel, this is based on the comic Spock Reflections, that shows an older Spock visiting the grave of Captain James T. Kirk. It is so perfectly realized. What an up. We spoke about this at the time, and this is before I understood more about this digital prosthetics technology. And this is an actor playing Leonard Nimoy, and it's fairly incredible. Lawrence Selleck looks spot on. Again, I know that there is prosthetic. It's one of those things where you're like, I know what I'm seeing, but this is a little bit hard to understand. But this moment, I remember watching it for the first time, and it just filled me with so much emotion seeing him standing there, but also the grander scale of seeing Spock standing at Kirk's grave. You know, in The Return, if you haven't read it, spoilers, I will say that there is a scene featuring Spock at the grave of Kirk, or where Kirk's body used to be, oink, and this absolutely captures that perfectly. Another thing that's so well done and taken up is the use of Captain Kirk's insignia that he would have worn, the one that was introduced in Star Trek The Wrath of Khan and used throughout those films. And you see it pop up again in things like The Next Generation, you see it in Voyager. It's beautiful, I've always loved it, as you know, big fan of Monster Maroons, and it's the insignia that goes with that. But it's scratched in all the right places, because you see in Generations Picard placing that on the rocks of the cairn, and that's what you see Spock picking up here in this short film. It is flipping beautiful. This Spock then seems to almost connect, if you like, with his younger self. We get another shot of the Enterprise 1701 crashing toward the Genesis planet. For me, that seems to tie in, you know, two crashing Enterprises, if you like, and, you know, the death of one and the rebirth as well. So it is a tiny little bit random, I won't lie. You know, I'm kind of, in my head, I'm going, oh, I can see why you would include that. But I also think, well, why that one specifically? But I think with a little bit of mental legerdemain, I can make that work. This brings us to the final of, to date, the short films, 765874 Unification. Now, Colt, who was a large part of the first and second short films, wasn't much a part of Regeneration, but she is back here. If you like, I think that Colt is this viewpoint character who helps us through time and space. This would be slightly consistent with the Star Trek Early Voyages comic that I mentioned earlier on, but there is something that blew my socks off right in the beginning of this short film. Well, the very beginning is a quote from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. How we deal with death is at least as important as how we deal with life. And then you get up the return of Gary Lockwood as Gary Mitchell. And I mean that. Gary Lockwood, who played Gary Mitchell in Where No Man Has Gone Before back in 1966 when it was released, reprised the role, again, using this technology that I've spoken about to play the part again. This is bonkers. I mean, surely that's got to be a record for longest appearance or longest stretch between appearances. Certainly in Star Trek, I mean, it was what, 58 years between appearances? It was mind-boggling. And to know that it was Gary who came in and they used this technology for him to play the part as he appeared there again. This is what I'm talking about when I say I trust the ethical use of this technology, which is what we're getting here. It's left up to the imagination a little bit. It seems to be that Gary Mitchell is at least partially responsible for the events of Unification that follow. We get a quick little flash of scenes we've already seen. You got the air trams from the motion picture, the D on the surface of Viridian 3, Spock on the surface of Viridian 3, and then you get, tying into Star Trek Picard, Colt standing apparently in Daystrom. It does say Daystrom Institute on the screen here, but we know that James T. Kirk's body was on Daystrom Station in The Bounty, episode 6 of Picard's 3rd season. She is wearing a Kelvin-style uniform. This is important. The whole scene is an up. This leads to the designed to kick you in the heart emotional part of this film. You know, we arrive on what seems to be an open air park. The camera pans down and you see a pair of familiar style boots and then trousers, filled with a person, of course, just a random pair of walking trousers, walking through this park. And then you have a hand in, again, familiar sleeve, not this one, I'm pointing at this one, but just, yeah, a familiar sleeve, and the reveal of Sam Witwer playing William Shatner, playing James T. Kirk. Sam Witwer is an absolute up. Not only is he a delight, look, as I say, I've chatted to the guy, he's lovely, but his mannerisms as Kirk are so on point. Let's all face it, you've heard the joke. Shatner always overacts, or Shatner does this, or Shatner does that. I'm not gonna lie to you and say I've never heard of it. I'm also not gonna lie to you and say I've never made that joke. However, Shatner, because I've gone back, I've done my rewatch of the original series, he was a lot more restrained than you would think. And a lot of it is in the expression and some of the movement. And that's what you get in Witwer's performance. Now you have the digital masking prosthetics technology, so you have that mapped over Sam's face, but it's Sam's expressions, it's Sam's performance, and that's what comes through. So he has to do a pitch perfect imitation of William Shatner, which he does. I mean, it's almost uncanny valley how close he gets to it. Now it's because he spent bloody ages working on it, but he really does embody what I certainly remember as William Shatner playing the part. In the way that he moves, certainly his face, it's a lot of it's in the face, but in the way that he holds himself as well. His walk brings him to this lovely fountain, around which is grouped a large amount of people. Again, to be inferred, but it looks like this is a group of descendants of the people nearest and dearest to Kirk. Now, I've seen a few theories as to what's happening here, that this is a clone of Kirk, and he's been brought back to life, that Kirk has in fact died, and this is a version of the afterlife. Frankly, I kind of like both interpretations. But if we go with the former, that this is sort of a rejuvenated Kirk, whether or not it's a clone or Kirk himself, he gets to see the descendants of the people that were so close to him. Now, there is a character who is standing there dressed in the dress uniform that was introduced in Star Trek Insurrection, and of course appears again at the wedding in Star Trek Nemesis, also appeared on an episode of Deep Space Nine, which is that white dress uniform. That character in the credits is called Crusher, just Crusher. This is sort of headcanon technology, or headcanon territory, I should say. If you want that to be a Traveller version of Wesley Crusher, you can. And that works, and it fits into canon, and it doesn't break anything. If you want it to be a descendant of somebody called Crusher, that works too. I like how open-ended it is, which is why it's an up to me. Just like why there is one character wearing the very noticeable black suit that David Cronenberg's Kovac wore in Discovery, just out of focus in the back. Is it Kovac? Probably, but it doesn't have to be. But I like that it can be, and why that's an up to me. I want to take this opportunity as well I want to give credit to Jörg Hillebrand, who is of course the absolute master and king of catching these little details. For example, he caught that there is a member of the crowd who appears to be a half Xindi primate who is wearing a medallion that Daniels showed Archer in Star Trek Enterprise. I mean, catching that stuff is just like, are you a witch, York? are you a witch? Because if you are, you're using your powers for good. But it also ties into another suggestion that this is not, in fact, an open-air park, but this is all aboard the Enterprise J. That ship has only been seen technically once, and that was in the Enterprise episode Azati Prime, when Daniels brings Archer there. In that episode, it was revealed that in the 26th century, the Enterprise J would be in service, and that Xindi would be serving as members of the crew, giving credence to this half Xindi member here at this fountain. Also, Kovic. Spoilers, by the way, but Kovic revealing himself as Daniels at the end of Star Trek Discovery, another point towards this. It's a beautiful little addition that technically didn't need to be done. But also, OTOY in the Roddenberry archive, thanks to Doug Drexler, have taken that original design and expanded it and shown a version of the Enterprise J, which is effectively a colony ship, that this massive saucer section does in fact contain things like rainforests and living areas for moving people from planet to planet to planet. It's a beautiful progression of a story, and this fits in without passing comment on the larger context of everything, but also still works quite beautifully in that story. There are 2 Vulcans present. Up, Robin Curtis, last seen as this character in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, obviously introduced in Star Trek II, The Search for Spock, taking over the role of Saavik, which was originated by Kirstie Alley in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Robin Curtis returned to play Saavik in this film. Robin Curtis obviously returned in Star Trek before this. She appeared in the episodes Gambit. Right in my heart, or right in my artificial heart if you're a Picard out there, but oh my goodness, how it felt to see Robin Curtis as Saavik once more. There is, just very quickly, there's the story that, you know, going into the making of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, there was the discussion, eventual massive disagreement between writer-director Nicholas Meyer and Gene Roddenberry, that Saavik was originally going to be the role that would end up being Valeris. And it's been discussed to death at this point, but yes, that could have been a return of Saavik. But even then, Robin Curtis wasn't approached for that film, whether it was going to be Saavik or not. I've always felt a tiny little bit sad that The Voyage Home was the last time we saw her as Saavik, because she was such a rich character to introduce, and she was obviously being set up to be a core member of that original series cast. In the script for Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, there is a line that heavily suggests Saavik is pregnant with a child she conceived with Spock on the Genesis planet. This was as young Spock his body was being rejuvenated. Obviously his Katra was still with Dr. McCoy. I say obviously as if that's a line that makes sense in any other context. But anyway, here we are. And Saavik helped this young Vulcan going through a lot of pain through that process. I had a really interesting discussion actually with somebody before that they really didn't like that scene, that they felt it was akin to abuse of a younger person. I've never read it that way. I read it as, because there's nothing inherently sexual in the scene in Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, that would lead to the conception of a child between the two. I always read it as Saavik helping Spock through this pain. I'm not saying one is right or wrong. It was just interesting to see that somebody had read it a completely different way. In The Voyage Home, now this is obviously cut from the film, so it's not in the film that we saw, but in the script, yes, it was more or less confirmed that Saavik was pregnant with Spock's child. Now, questions arise. Why was that never brought up again? Seems like something that would probably be mentioned at some point. Well, here it's not just mentioned. Sorak, Spock's son, is standing beside Saavik. So much of this I love. I want to give my latinum up of the 4 projects to Robin Curtis returning. She does so much with an eyebrow. They aged her up in the makeup as well, and in the accompanying interview that you can find on the roddenberryarchive.com, in which Robin Curtis speaks about coming back as Saavik, she gets quite emotional when she speaks about her joy at finding that Saavik, this character she hadn't played since 1986, did have a beautiful, happy life, raising her son as much as anything else. Sorak is a character who originated in a novel called Vulcan's Heart. That was written by Joseph Sherman and Susan Schwartz. So again, another tying into expanded Star Trek history, and in that novel, Spock and Saavik actually get married And I just thought, what a beautiful thing to include. But there's also a specific reason to include Spock's family in this short film that seems to be all about Kirk's life and Kirk's ending. Saavik nods toward another character who is standing by the fountain. Taken up, Lieutenant Yor, the Betelgeusian time soldier, if you like, who was introduced in Star Trek Discovery's 3rd season, the episode Terra Firma Part 1. Now, we only saw Yor after the fact. He had traveled across the universes from a universe created by a Romulan mining ship going back in time. Sound familiar? Unfortunately, it didn't end well for poor old Yor. So this is presumably Yor from a happier time when he's, alive. And he's standing there in the uniform that was seen in Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 1 and 2, and he's wearing the correct insignia. Speaking of insignia, he hands Kirk back that same insignia that Spock picked up in Regeneration. This seems to bring Kirk to a between place, a corridor between worlds, if you will. And as he looks down and he sees his reflection looking back up at him, is Kirk as he appeared in the original series. Not to belabor a point, but because then we get 3 versions of Kirk standing more or less alongside each other. We see the Kirk as he appeared in Generations, the Kirk as he appeared in the original series, and then finally the Kirk as he appeared in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, all being played by Sam Witwer with this technology. I'm so jealous of his uniform collection. I have a decent uniform collection, but I'm jealous of this one. Again, the emotion, but again, the way Sam holds himself, particularly as original series Kirk. There was a way William Shatner held himself, and it's pitch perfect. We also get that voiceover that comes from Kirk's log at the end of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. There are always possibilities, Spock said, and if Genesis is indeed life from lifelessness, I must return here again. Taken up. I do have to be on it. I do have it down, and as the 3 Kirks are standing side by side, I can see that it's green screen in that scene alone. So I'm really nitpicking, I know, as I say that, but there, it doesn't marry up, I think, as well as the rest of the film. But this brings us to our final scene, and it's in the Kelvin universe, because as we know, Spock, Ambassador Spock, the one we grew up with, he had his last days in the Kelvin universe. Kirk is walking into his quarters on Vulcan. We see in the background some very familiar pieces of set decoration. We see those bells that appeared in the original series. We see the Vulcan loot that appeared in the original series, all of which have appeared again in Strange New Worlds. We see a piece of wall decoration that appeared in Voyager and Enterprise. On his bedside table, we see an Idic pendant. Infinite diversity, infinite combinations. There's this beautiful, beautiful message. We see a brooch that is Vulcan script that was actually a prop owned by Mike Okuda, who was of course involved in all of this as well. That was brought in. We see just, the feelings. That photo holder that we saw in Star Trek Beyond, the one that contained that photo of the promotional photo from Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, of the full cast. We also saw that there's a teaser trailer released for this that showed Yeoman Colt in her Kelvin style uniform holding that. So yeah, that was a little bit beautiful. And also, I am told by the internet there is a glass that was the Ultima Thule designed by Tapio Verkala. It's very nice. It also appeared in Star Trek Enterprise, being drank out of by Shran. So, cool. Now I believe that Spock and Shran had little side adventures, and I'm okay with this. But my silly jokingness aside, because my heart's about to explode in my chest, you have Kirk and Spock meeting one last time as Spock is on his deathbed. On the one hand, I am aware that this is Sam Witwer and Lawrence Selleck sitting down playing this scene. And I am aware that I am watching digital prosthetics, and I'm aware that, it's not William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy. And yet, the combination of all of the above, the direction, the lighting, the music, everything, I will talk about the music in a moment, for me, I think this gives us the perfect ending to these 2 characters. Because of course the sad circumstances of Leonard Nimoy's passing meant that we never got an on-screen passing for Spock, and we certainly never got the two prime versions of those characters meet. The last time they were on screen together, you know, officially was in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. Kirk obviously dying in Star Trek Generations, and then Spock eventually going missing and heading over to the Kelvin universe. What a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. Unification. The larger meaning, of course, being the unification of the Vulcans and the Romulan people, but these two characters, these two friends, coming back together again at the end. They clasp hands. Spock looks genuinely surprised and heartwarmed to see Kirk there. So much being done with eyebrows and looks. There was a discussion, production designer Dave Blass spoke about this online, as to, you know, would there be dialogue in this film? And I had assumed that there was rights issues. That although this is all done with the license from Paramount, like Paramount are fine with all of this, that I thought maybe there was an issue, but no, the decision was deliberate not to include dialogue. And I think it works as is. That final shot of the two of them looking out at the sunset together is my dilithium of this project to date. The whole thing is set to a beautiful score by Michael Giacchino, who is just chuck that man some more Oscars, because he's so prolific. But he scored all three of the Kelvin universe films. So thematically, it's also beautiful to have him scoring this piece, which includes scenes in the Kelvin universe. He also directed one of the short Treks, Ephraim and Dot. Like, the man's a card-carrying Trekkie. And to have him, who is also an Oscar-winning composer, involved in this short film is no small thing. The team that put these four together, they are die-hard Trekkies. You have Jules Urbach, who's the CEO of OTOY, who is, I spoke to the man, and I mean, like, sometimes you meet someone and you go, oh, you know more about Star Trek than I do. Yeah. I kind of got that feeling with him. You had director Carlos Baena, who just, I mean, the thing looks beautiful. All four, they look beautiful. You have the director of photography, who has the single coolest name I've ever heard, which is Leonidas Jaramillo, who is just cool. Anyway, the thing looks beautiful. Also, look, executive producer Rod Roddenberry. This is all done with the inclusion of the Roddenberry estate, the Roddenberry archive. As I say, it was licensed by Paramount, so it's all cool. You know, it's you know, everyone's cool, if you like. But in the credit roll, starring William Shatner. Again, this is not just Sam Witwer doing a fantastic Shatner impression, but it's also William Shatner did perform as part of this. Now, it might have been, you know, two renderings and, you know, saving his image, if you like, but he is very much a part of this. The thing, of course, is dedicated for Leonard Nimoy, and Susan Bay Nimoy is an executive producer on this as well. The whole project, 765874, is currently, we're up to date, and while there may be plans for more, I am not currently aware of them. If this is the last piece, which I sincerely hope it isn't, but if it was, this is a beautiful ending to an era, because it feels like in 4 short pieces they managed to tie up an awful lot of loose ends. Gary Mitchell is still out there, Yeoman Colt is still out there, so I would like to see expansions of their stories. But I almost feel I've now got the closure with Kirk and Spock that I didn't get in the Prime series movies or the Kelvin series movies. And it's quite beautiful here. But as I say, the inclusion of Saavik and Robin Curtis, good soup. That brings us to the end of this piece, and thank you so much for watching along. I know this one was a little bit different because we're talking about short films, and you know, it's one of those ones as well it's canon if you want it to be, because nothing in here contradicts established canon in any way. You have Saavik of the future, you know what I mean? You also have, you know, Kirk after what happened on Veridian 3. You have Spock in his dying days, which we didn't see in the Kelvin universe. So if you want to, you can put them all in a box and put them aside and say, that's not canon, that's not my Star Trek, and that's absolutely fine. That's the great thing about it. And if you want to go that actually this is an expansion of what was already there, that's beautiful too. I have thoroughly enjoyed going through this. As you can tell, I'm quite passionate about this. I really enjoy it. I hope that I've explained my feelings on the digital prosthetics that were used in this as well, because I say it is a nuanced discussion. There's interviews on the channel. We have interviews with Sam Witwer, we have an interview with director Carlos Baena, we have interviews with Jules Urbach, and we have interviews with Leonidas Jaramillo as well, all on the channel. I do hope you'll check those out because it's a really interesting time we live in. I think we're going to see more things like this. So ethics is vital in this kind of project. As I say, you'd struggle to find people who cared about Star Trek more than the ones who put this one together. So thank you very much, everyone. You are awesome and wonderful. I will see you again next week, of course, for the ups and downs. Until then, please make sure that you're following us on the various socials. We're at TrekCulture or at TrekCultureYT on Instagram. I am at Sean Ferrick. You are a big bunch of legends is what you are. Make sure that you live long and prosper in this very uncertain world that can be quite overwhelming. Sometimes just saying something nice to somebody else can really make a difference in somebody's day. And you can be that difference. So if you can say something nice to somebody today, do it. Thank you so much. You are wonderful. I will see you soon. Live long and prosper.